tucked away in the back of his wife's closet, hidden beneath old scarves and forgotten keepsakes, was something that shattered everything he thought he knew about Selene Crowley. Fake IDs with different names. Wads of cash, a burner phone with a single chilling message. It's taken care of. No loose ends. Days later, Ethan was dead. And by the time anyone realized the truth, Selene was already gone. Ethan Crowley had everything a man could want. A thriving career in real estate, a beautiful home in a quiet Denver neighborhood, and a wife who seemed perfect in every way. Selene was the kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room, not just because of her striking features, but because she carried an air of quiet grace. She had a mysterious past, but Ethan never pressed her about it. She had told him once that she had grown up moving from place to place, always searching for stability, and when they got married, he promised her that she would never have to run again. Their life together was by all appearances happy. Ethan worked long hours, but he always made time for Selene. They spent weekends hiking in the mountains, hosting dinner parties, and planning for the future. They had no children, but they talked about it occasionally, imagining what their family might look like in a few years. To Ethan, life felt stable and secure. He had no reason to believe otherwise. That changed on a quiet Wednesday evening. Ethan had arrived home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Selene with dinner. She wasn't there when he walked in, and he found a note on the counter saying she had gone to a last-minute charity meeting. He smiled, shaking his head. That was Selene, always giving her time to help others. With a few hours to himself, Ethan decided to tackle a project he had been putting off for months. The basement storage room was cluttered with old boxes, furniture, and things they had never unpacked since moving in. He wanted to clear some space. As he sorted through the mess, he pushed aside a stack of old linens and noticed something unusual. A locked wooden box tucked behind an old dresser. It was unmarked, dusty, and something about it struck him as odd. He had never seen it before. Curiosity got the better of him. He searched for a key, checking drawers and cabinets, and finally found a small silver key inside one of Selene's jewelry boxes. When he turned it in the lock, his hands felt clammy. The lid creaked open, and inside he found something that sent a cold chill through his body. There were stacks of $100 bills, neatly bundled. That alone was strange. Why would Selene keep so much cash hidden away? But what unsettled him even more were the identification cards beneath the money. There were 3 different driver's licenses, each with Selene's face but different names. He picked one up, examining it closely. The name on the card was Margaret Ellis. The next one said Nina Caldwell. None of them bore the name Selene Crowley. Ethan's pulse quickened. He dug deeper into the box, finding a small burner phone, the kind that couldn't be traced. He pressed the power button and the screen lit up, revealing a single unread message. No contacts. No call history, just one message from an unknown number. It's taken care of, no loose ends. Ethan swallowed hard. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was looking at. Who was his wife really, and what had she done that needed to be taken care of? He sat in silence, gripping the phone in one hand and one of the fake IDs in the other. A wave of nausea hit him. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Selene was hiding something big. He had always known she was private about her past, but he had assumed it was because of a difficult childhood. Now, for the first time, he realized he had no idea who he had married. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped him out of his thoughts. He scrambled to put everything back, locking the box and returning the key to its place. His heart pounded as he heard the front door open. Selene's voice called out, cheerful and light. "Ethan, are you home?" He wiped his palms on his jeans, forcing himself to breathe. He couldn't let her see the fear in his eyes. Whatever this was, he had to figure it out before it was too late. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed next to Selene, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the contents of that box, the cash, the IDs, the phone, and the chilling message. It didn't make sense. Selene had always been kind, loving, and devoted. She'd volunteered at shelters, helped neighbors, and never showed any sign of being anything other than a caring wife. But the evidence in that box told a different story. As the hours passed, he knew he couldn't let it go. He needed answers. The next morning, while Selene was in the shower, he took the burner phone from the box and slipped it into his pocket. He drove to work as usual, but parked a few blocks away from his office. Sitting in his car, he turned on the phone again and stared at the message. It was brief, cryptic, and unsettling. He hesitated, then typed a response. "Who's this?" Minutes passed with no reply. He checked the call log. Empty. The contacts list. Empty. The only thing stored on the phone was that single message. He copied the number into his personal phone and ran a quick search. Nothing came up. It was a dead end. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than he realized. He decided to dig deeper. He started with the names on the IDs. Margaret Ellis, Nina Caldwell, and the third, which he hadn't looked at closely the night before, Rachel Devlin. He typed the names into a search engine, one by one, expecting to find nothing. But when he searched for Rachel Devlin, a missing persons report popped up. His breath caught in his throat as he clicked on the link. Rachel Devlin had disappeared 5 years ago from Portland, Oregon. She was last seen withdrawing money from an ATM late at night. Her car was found abandoned 3 miles from her apartment. No signs of struggle, no leads. The case had gone cold. Ethan felt a creeping sense of dread. It wasn't just that Selene had an ID with Rachel's name on it. It was that the photo on the missing persons report, the woman the police were looking for, looked exactly like his wife. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the article, reading about Rachel's life, her job as a dental assistant, her sudden disappearance. Had she changed her name? Was Selene actually Rachel? If so, why? What had she been running from? Or worse, what had she done? Ethan's stomach twisted. He had to know more. He searched for the other 2 names, but neither Margaret Ellis nor Nina Caldwell had any missing person reports connected to them. Still, that didn't mean they weren't important. Maybe they were just other identities Selene had used before. His mind reeled as he considered his options. He could go to the police, but what would he even say? That his wife had a box of fake IDs? That wasn't a crime on its own. And what if he was wrong? What if there was an explanation? No, he needed to be sure before making any accusations. He decided to confide in the one person he trusted most, his sister, Gwen. She had always been protective of him, and though she had never voiced any strong opinions about Selene, he had the feeling she had her doubts. He drove to her house that evening, barely able to keep his voice steady as he told her what he had found. Gwen didn't hesitate. "You need to go to the police," she said firmly. Ethan hesitated. I don't know, Gwen. What if I'm wrong? What if there's a logical explanation? Ethan, you said she has an idea of a missing woman. What if she's dangerous? Ethan exhaled slowly. He didn't want to believe that. Selene had never given him a reason to fear her. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't ignore what he had found. That night, he decided to confront Selene. He wasn't going to accuse her outright, just ask some questions, see how she reacted. He needed to hear her explanation before he did anything drastic. But Ethan didn't realize that by the time he started asking questions, it would already be too late. Ethan sat at the dining table, watching Selene move around the kitchen. She hummed softly as she prepared their usual evening tea, completely unaware of the storm raging inside his mind. He had rehearsed what he was going to say a dozen times, but now that the moment had arrived, his throat felt dry. The box, the money, the IDs, everything pointed to something dark, something he wasn't sure he was ready to accept, but he couldn't ignore it. He had to know the truth. "Selene," he said carefully, keeping his tone light, "have you ever been to Portland?" She paused just for a fraction of a second before turning back to him with a smile. "No, why?" Ethan studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. There was nothing, just her usual warmth, her familiar ease. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe there was an explanation for everything. Still, doubt gnawed at him. "I just came across something today about a woman from there. Her name was Rachel Devlin." Selene's hand stilled for the briefest moment before she continued stirring the tea. "Doesn't ring a bell," she said casually. "Who is she?" Ethan hesitated. Should he push further? He had planned to take this slowly, but the way she had hesitated, just a flicker of something, made him uneasy. "Just someone I read about," he said instead. "She went missing a few years ago." Selene turned, holding out his tea. "That's terrible," she murmured, her eyes steady on his. "I hope they find her." Ethan took the cup, his fingers tightening around the handle. Something wasn't right. That night he barely slept. Selene lay beside him, breathing evenly, but his mind refused to rest. The moment she had hesitated in the kitchen replayed over and over in his head. Maybe he was imagining it. Maybe he was letting paranoia get the best of him. Or maybe Selene knew exactly who Rachel Devlin was. The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling groggy, his limbs heavy, his head throbbed, and for a moment he couldn't remember falling asleep. When he glanced at the clock, confusion set in. It was nearly noon. He never slept that late, not even on weekends. Had he been that exhausted? He forced himself up, shaking off the sluggishness, and stumbled toward the bathroom. His vision blurred slightly as he splashed cold water on his face. Something felt off, his body ached, and his head was swimming in a way that didn't feel normal. Downstairs, Selene was already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with a serene smile. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said. Ethan frowned, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel weird." "You've been overworking yourself," she said. "You needed the rest." He nodded slowly, but something nagged at him. He didn't feel sick. He felt drugged. That thought sent a jolt of alarm through him. Was it possible? Had Selene done something? No, he was being ridiculous. This was his wife, the woman he had shared his life with for years. She wouldn't... But then he thought about the box, the IDs, the message on the burner phone. "It's taken care of. No loose ends." The nausea returned, stronger this time. He needed to get out of the house. Ethan grabbed his phone, pretending he was heading out for errands. Once he was in his car, he called Gwen. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "I think she did something to me." Gwen's voice was sharp with alarm. "Get out of there, Ethan, now." He was about to respond when a wave of dizziness hit him. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He wasn't just being paranoid. Something was very, very wrong. But Ethan had no idea that in just a matter of hours, he would be dead. Detective Ray Lasker arrived at the Crowley residence on a cold Thursday morning, called in after what appeared to be a tragic accident. Ethan Crowley had been found dead at the bottom of the stairs, his head split open from the impact against the marble floor. His wife, Selene, had made the 911 call, her voice trembling with grief as she told the dispatcher that she had found her husband unresponsive when she returned from running errands. On the surface, it seemed like an unfortunate mishap, a husband slipping on the stairs, losing his balance and meeting a fatal end. But something about the scene didn't sit right with Lasker. He had worked homicide long enough to know that sometimes accidents weren't accidents at all. Ethan's sister, Gwen, had been the one to demand a second look. She had stormed into the station hours after Ethan's death, frantic and furious. "He was scared," she told Lasker. "He told me something was wrong. He thought Selene was drugging him." Lasker had heard plenty of family disputes before, but Gwen's desperation struck him. She wasn't just grieving. She was convinced her brother had been murdered, and the more Lasker looked into the case, the more he started to believe her. The autopsy results were the first red flag. Ethan had traces of a powerful sedative in his system, something that wouldn't be there under normal circumstances. It was enough to disorient him, enough to make him unsteady. If he had been drugged before his fall, then the accident wasn't an accident at all. Lasker went back to the Crowley home, this time looking at everything with fresh eyes. The stairs were steep, yes, but there was no sign of a struggle. No handprints on the railing, no scuff marks that suggested Ethan had tried to catch himself. It was almost as if he had simply collapsed, or had been pushed. Selene, of course, had an explanation for everything. She was composed but appropriately grieving. She spoke about how Ethan had been exhausted lately, how he had been working too hard, how she had told him to slow down. "I begged him to take better care of himself," she murmured, wiping away a tear. But he wouldn't listen. She told Lasker she had spent the afternoon running errands, stopping at the grocery store and then at a cafe. Sure enough, security cameras confirmed her story. At the exact time of Ethan's death, she had been miles away, sipping coffee at a small corner cafe. That should have been enough to clear her, but it didn't. Something about her was too smooth, too controlled. Lasker started digging into Selene's past. What he found made the hairs on his neck stand up. Selene Crowley had no history before 7 years ago. No school records, no employment history, no medical files, nothing. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere. He ran her name through national databases, searching for any connections. What he found was chilling. The name Rachel Devlin popped up in connection with a missing persons case in Oregon. A woman who had vanished without a trace 5 years before. A woman who looked exactly like Selene Crowley. Lasker kept searching. There were other names, too. Margaret Ellis, Nina Caldwell. Each name tied to a different city. Each name tied to a man who had either gone missing or died under strange circumstances. Selene had been married before, more than once, and each time her husbands had either disappeared or suffered tragic accidents. Ethan wasn't her first victim, and if Lasker didn't move fast, he wouldn't be the last. Detective Ray Lasker knew time was running out. If Selene Crowley, if that was even her real name, had been responsible for multiple deaths, then she was more than just a grieving widow. She was a predator, and Ethan Crowley had been her latest victim. But knowing it and proving it were two different things. He needed hard evidence, something that would tie her directly to Ethan's death. The sedative found in Ethan's system was a good start, but Selene's airtight alibi complicated matters. She had been at a cafe when he died, far from the scene. The security footage confirmed it. That meant one of two things. Either someone else had been involved, or she had planned Ethan's death long before that day. Lasker decided to take a closer look at the Crowley home. Something told him that whatever had happened to Ethan had started long before his fatal fall. He obtained a warrant and combed through every inch of the house. His gut told him that Selene had left something behind, some small detail she hadn't thought to erase. His persistence paid off. In a locked drawer in Selene's vanity, he found an unlabeled pill bottle containing traces of the same sedative that had been found in Ethan's system. But that wasn't all. Inside the drawer was a key. A small, silver key that didn't match anything in the house. It took another 2 days, but Lasker finally figured out what it unlocked. A storage unit rented under an alias. Margaret Ellis. the name from one of Selene's fake. What he found inside was worse than he imagined. There were files, detailed, meticulous files on each of her past husbands, notes about their routines, their habits, their finances, receipts for life insurance policies, and worst of all, a collection of IDs, each bearing her face with different names. There was no doubt now Selene had done this before, and she had done it well. Lasker had what he needed. He moved quickly, arresting Selene at her home. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why she was being taken in. She simply looked at him and smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill down his spine. In the interrogation room, she remained calm, her hands folded neatly on the table. "Detective," she said smoothly, "you seem very sure of yourself." Lasker placed the storage unit evidence in front of her. "You've done this before," he said. "We have proof." She glanced at the photos, the IDs, the notes in her own handwriting. Then she leaned back in her chair, unfazed. "Do you?" she asked. That was when Lasker realized something. Selene wasn't scared. She wasn't surprised. She was prepared. Over the next few days, the case against her started to unravel. The pill bottle found in her vanity had no fingerprints. The files in the storage unit, while damning, had no direct link to Ethan's death. Even the sedative in his system wasn't enough. There was no proof she had given it to him. And then came the final blow. The security footage that had originally placed Selene at the cafe during Ethan's time of death, it was re-examined. A closer look revealed something shocking. The timestamp had been altered. The footage had been doctored. Someone had planted an alibi for her, which meant she wasn't working alone. By the time detectives pieced it together, it was too late. The morning Selene was set to be formally charged, her cell was found empty. She was gone. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, just a missing prisoner and a single note left on the cot, scrawled in perfect cursive. No loose ends. Lasker stood in the empty cell, jaw tight. He had been so close. But Selene, Rachel, Margaret, Nina, whoever she really was, wasn't just a killer. She was a ghost, a master of disappearing, of starting over. And somewhere she was already becoming someone else.